After Joker 3, Dragon Quest Monsters would undergo a bit of a dry spell. Joker 3 Professional, an updated version of the original with extra story content and more monsters to scout, released a month before the launch of the Nintendo Switch. Despite the new console's approach, Joker 3 Professional still went on to top the sales charts its first week out, at least according to this article I found by 4gamer.net, which I believe is reporting on data collected by Media Create. But we're not here to talk about Joker 3. That's a different video you can watch. With the release of a brand new console, it's obvious where the minds of fans went. We've had a new Monsters title on every Nintendo handheld so far. When are we getting the Monsters title for the Switch? This would be the question they'd continually ask themselves for the next 7 years. In the meantime, Dragon Quest would be going through a sort of media renaissance. We had Dragon Quest XI, of course, but there was also Dragon Quest Builders, Dragon Quest Heroes, a slew of mobile gacha games you shouldn't waste your time on, a decent movie that falls apart in the third act, and even a weird action-adventure take on Dragon Quest Monsters, kind of? Oh, and a couple of expansions to their MMO. And it seems as though, during this period of time, the Dragon Quest team was content with keeping the Monsters series on the shelf. Could have been for a variety of reasons, fatigue being one of them. Monsters might not have been the only spin-off they were producing in the 2010s, but it certainly demanded a great deal of attention given that it's the second most popular series under the Dragon Quest umbrella. The expectation of each new Monsters title being bigger and better than the last might have finally dried up the well of iterative ideas after Joker 3. New experiences can be another reason. Square Enix was pushing many new Dragon Quest spin-offs and assorted Dragon Quest media. They might have been trying to widen the scope of the Dragon Quest IP and decided new product lines were more lucrative or beneficial than releasing another entry in a well-established part of the franchise. In any case, it seemed like we weren't getting another Monsters title despite how active the Dragon Quest series had been, until finally Dragon Quest Monsters: The Dark Prince was announced for the Nintendo Switch. And then it was never heard from again. I'm only half kidding. Many of you watching this might not even be aware The Dark Prince is a real video game you can play right now. The marketing for The Dark Prince was virtually non-existent, and this should be alarming to anyone interested in future Dragon Quest titles. As a Dragon Quest fan in the West, there's an implicit understanding of how well the series does out here. That is to say, not well! Dragon Quest is a huge deal in Japan, but it's unfortunately a niche series in the West, and we're all painfully aware of it. Still, you would think Square Enix would have understood what exactly they were doing by localizing a new Monsters title. It's not just a spin-off for many Western Dragon Quest fans, it's the spin-off. More than Builders, more than Heroes, and definitely more than Rocket Slime, Dragon Quest Monsters is arguably just as or even more popular than mainline Dragon Quest. So naturally, you want this one to sell comparatively well, right? Well, Square Enix had other ideas. While the Japanese audience was being fed trailer after trailer, Western marketing for The Dark Prince was not so great. Basically non-existent, as has been the case for many Square Enix titles in 2023. Fewer trailers and a barren social media presence, but hey, no worries, at least Western fans got blog posts on Square's official website? Because that's where everybody gets their news from, right? And what little social media presence this game had left a lot to be desired. The social media team needs a bigger budget, or at least access to proper resources. Check out this fan cam that's using royalty-free music for a Dragon Quest game. Koichi Sugiyama is burning in hell, but you would think a piece of Dragon Quest advertising would at the very least use Dragon Quest music in it. The marketing for The Dark Prince is so bad that Infinity Strash got better marketing, and that game's a glorified clip show for the anime. The fact that Infinity Strash had a more aggressive ad campaign than Monsters is indicative of Square Enix's fundamental misunderstanding of what Western Dragon Quest fans want. To make little to no effort to push the second largest concept in Dragon Quest might as well have been a vote of no confidence in The Dark Prince. Now, usually the fan base of something isn't who you need to market to. Those folks are going to support your release and follow it closely because they're fans. But I have friends and audience members who are big fans of Dragon Quest, and specifically Dragon Quest Monsters, who didn't know The Dark Prince was even a video game until I tweeted about it a few days ago from the time I'm writing this. Not even Dragon Quest fans are aware of this game's release. That's how bad the marketing for it was. It leads me to believe it's not going to sell well in the niche market it's already in, and largely due to the fact that the marketing team didn't have the proper resources to do it. And that sucks. It sucks because it's going to tell Square Enix that people don't want monsters in the West, but there's a huge potential market here, not just in Dragon Quest communities, but also in other monster catching fan bases. The Dark Prince had a real chance to win over new players who'd felt burnt by recent Pokemon releases, or even people who just want more monster catching in general. It's a shame this might not happen due to how Square Enix handled the advertising. Because The Dark Prince is a solid comeback performance for the Monster series, with an admittedly strange phenomenon attached to it. It's going to feel very different depending on where in the Monster series you're coming from. For Western fans, the last Monsters entry they had access to was during the DS era, because all the 3DS titles, which had built off of the Fantastic Joker 2, were never localized. For more savvy Western fans, they'll have the complete perspective of the series' evolution, or should I say devolution. The Dark Prince falls into a potentially divisive space. Folks coming at it from Joker 2 or further back in the series are going to notice fewer changes. Some quality of life, a tweaking of the way monster sizes work, no big deal. But if you've played the rest of the series, The Dark Prince might initially be discouraging. This feels like a Monsters game stripped down to its bare essentials. In the case of battling, many of the secondary characteristics of a Monsters game, established by the 3DS era of the series, are noticeably missing from The Dark Prince. Skill clashing, tension triggers, co-op attacks, elemental bonuses for consecutive element use, these have all been removed from the Monsters combat in favor of a simpler, straightforward system. Psyching up and tension in general have been removed in favor of a seething ability only some monsters come equipped with, effectively removing tension mechanics entirely. Monster synthesis, as well as monster growth in general, has been simplified with the removal of the rank offset mechanic that accelerated monster leveling rates. Traits have changed from being static passive bonuses earned on synthesis with a high enough rank offset into unlockable ones when the monster in question reaches a certain level. It's evident they simplified the Dark Prince to appeal to a wider audience. It's been almost 7 years since the last Monsters title, longer if you've only played the Western releases. The fanbase as it is isn't very large, and the diehard fans of the series can't generate the sales numbers they're probably looking for. So the last thing they'd want to do is overwhelm potential new players with all these numbers and mechanics. It's Dragon Quest after all, it's supposed to be inviting and easy to play. But whenever you remove mechanics from a series which has been slowly evolving over time, you're at risk of underwhelming the audience which has stuck with it for so long. Thankfully, this isn't the case with The Dark Prince. When you peel back a Monsters title, you're still left with an incredibly strong core owing to a fantastic gameplay experience. Rather than focusing on what The Dark Prince left out, it's better to pay attention to what it left in and what it added, because the sum of this mechanical arithmetic is still a net positive. You could even say what Dark Prince removed was minutia which ultimately bogged gameplay too far down into specific numbers and tedium. The Dark Prince kept quite a few bits of quality of life from previous entries and complemented them with 1 or 2 additions of its own. It understood Joker 3's greatest contribution to the series, handing out information. You can still read an enemy's resistance to an ability before using it on them in The Dark Prince, only in this case, you are now given the exact degree of effectiveness said ability would have. This transparent conveyance of information sounds like it'd make things too easy, but I'd argue the opposite. With many bosses in The Dark Prince slightly susceptible to status ailments, this information tantalizes players into wasting turns on casting debuffs which might never successfully apply. All the while, maintaining HP and MP becomes more difficult the longer the battle continues. Although it's a subtle change, it encourages the player to take risks and pay the consequences when they don't succeed. The speed up function remains a staple of the series now, speeding up the repetition of fighting monsters over and over again in an attempt to scout them, or if you're impatient like I am and simultaneously also want to fight every monster you see on the map. Prince adds an auto battle mode for those of us who prefer to let our monsters decide what to do in combat, and would rather not mash the A button repeatedly to do it. The auto battle is a handy feature for returning monsters veterans. Speaking from experience, when you've played enough of these, you stop having to give direct orders. Expert monsters players craft their teams to run on autopilot. There's something immensely satisfying about watching your party decimate the enemy without you having to lift a finger to do it, all because you carefully synthesized your monsters with specific abilities. To make it even better, the AI options in the Dark Prince have been upgraded from toggling whether or not a monster uses a specific move to tweaking the frequency of when they use them. Altogether, these quality of life features mean you're at your best when you don't have to directly order your monsters around, a satisfying reward for careful planning and strategy. And instead of psyching up, monsters can randomly enter into a frenzied state, giving them bonus actions and buffed stats for a set number of turns. Frenzied states keep surprises happening in the Dark Prince's battles, and I'll admit, I still think clashing is more exciting. But frenzied states can shift battles in tense situations when enemies become superpowered. Suddenly, that boss has an extra turn and extra defense, and you're going from wailing on them senselessly to pulling back into defensive actions to survive what is essentially their counterattack. Inversely, when your monsters frenzy, battles turn into triumphant beatdowns as you take the opportunity to unleash said monster's strongest abilities for maximum damage output. Combat in the Dark Prince is far more bombastic than in previous entries. Even without those secondary mechanics, the complexity and challenge of a modern monsters entry is still here, just buried underneath a UI that I think could have used some character. In previous titles, you wouldn't have access to powerful abilities until near the endgame, or even the post-game when S-rank monsters finally became available to you. But in the Dark Prince, C-rank, even some D-rank monsters gain access to powerful breath abilities or magic spells capable of dealing gross amounts of damage. So by hour 10 or 12, you've already assembled a team of monsters absolutely demolishing the field of enemies left and right. And Dark Prince, despite its simplified form, encourages and even demands players make full use of these skills in battle, then later throws in boss fights where it attempts to shut down those strategies, forcing players to rethink their battle plans and monster synthesizations. All in all, the Dark Prince retains most of what makes a Monsters title great. At the core of every Monsters game is a strong gameplay loop revolving around training and synthesizing monsters to get around various challenges. Even though you'll be aware of the missing mechanics from the remakes of 1 and 2 and Joker 3, it'll be hard to miss them when you're focused on searching for bigger, badder monsters with bigger, badder abilities than the last. You'll be too hungry for power to feel like something is missing. A fitting sensation considering you're playing as the power-hungry antagonist of a Dragon Quest title. Leading the scenario team on the Dark Prince is Jin Fujisawa, director for Dragon Quest IX and Dragon Quest X. Fujisawa has a firm grasp on creating approachable design. In a segment of Iwata Asks, the interview series hosted by the late Satoru Iwata, Fujisawa stresses multiple times his desire to make Dragon Quest X an approachable game for players without a ton of MMO experience, as well as making it easy for players to put it down for long periods of time and still be able to catch up to friends playing incongruently. Fujisawa has worked on scenario for Dragon Quest before, mostly on remakes and re-releases of older titles where the size of his contributions may vary, but he was on the original scenario staff for Dragon Quest VIII. Why do I bring up his directing credits and approach to approachability? Well, you'd be surprised how integral having this quality is when penning a Dragon Quest scenario. We bring vignetting up a lot on this series. I don't know if I'm using the term correctly, but we do bring it up. Dragon Quest's easy to understand design includes telling a captivating story anyone can enjoy. This means they have to be easy to follow along. It's partly why I don't like Dragon Quest VI very much. Its story throws you around from one villain to the next without much reason or explanation. I keep bringing up Dragon Quest VI in this series. What is wrong with me? The vignettes of Dragon Quest are episodic in nature, centralized to single locations and periods of time. bookended by discovering a problem happening to the people there and disintegrating the cute monster design causing them. Go to the next town over, rinse, and repeat. Your adventures in the underworld of Naderia are frequently interrupted by Sato's underlings pulling him away to participate in a cutscene explaining his whereabouts during pivotal moments in Dragon Quest IV, many of which boil down to he was there the whole time. And in a lesser game, this would have been jarring or disruptive to the storytelling experience, but this doesn't happen in The Dark Prince due to how its locations are structured. Each circle of Naderia is split into 3 separate echelons, with higher tiers locked away behind defeating the bosses of the lower tiers. Now, Fujisawa could have made separate, tiny storylines for each echelon and given us many small stories opening and closing in rapid succession. Instead, his team designed each vignette to be a single act in a 3-act story split across each tier. This complements the main scenario of The Dark Prince exceedingly well, since all the story beats across the title are organized uniformly. All the setup for the Circles of Naderia and the main scenario occur at the same time. The rising actions come up together to build off each other's suspense, and the climaxes result in exciting boss fight after boss fight, highlighting the growing strength of our hero and leading to a string of satisfying payoffs. It plays out better than what a more linear, traditional Dragon Quest story would have churned out. You can imagine the wild sense of highs and lows you'd end up feeling had each Circle of Naderia been visited in its entirety one after the other, all the while this main overarching storyline slowly builds itself up. The Dark Prince's storytelling structure helps it get away with more. The lows are sandwiched together and fleeting, and the highs are one after the other, helping them stay memorable and keeping player enthusiasm active. It takes a dab hand to juggle this many storylines in this fashion, and you've gotta give the scenario team credit for it. The Dark Prince's narrative and core gameplay are complemented by excellent level design. Each Circle of Naderia is thematically different from the last, with each echelon taking the theme in a slightly different direction. The Circle of Caprice begins at an oasis, later moving on to a desert, and finally ending in a ruin. The Circle of Indulgence is a sweet tooth paradise, stacking more and more desserts on top of itself the higher you go. The Circle of the Fire one is a little repetitive, to be honest. I didn't like it too much. But exploration in each echelon feels different from the last. In some, you're climbing upwards towards the summit of a mountain. In others, you're weaving in and out of the makeshift alleys of a junkyard. Every nook and cranny is absconding a treasure chest or mini-medal, and different monsters will populate different areas of each echelon, meaning there's always a new monster to scout in that one corner of the map you haven't been to yet. Navigation is rewarding in The Dark Prince, keeping player interest high, and varied enough to keep them doing it without it feeling like the same old chore. In addition to all these neat areas, The Dark Prince also has a dungeon for almost every echelon, and I'm happy to say, they're pretty good. At first, dungeons are short and simple, but grow in complexity over time, not necessarily in the form of puzzles, though the dungeons in the last act of The Dark Prince all possess some kind of puzzle mechanic to work with. Dungeons are of varying length, taking careful consideration for how involved exploration of their echelon was, or how long the previous dungeons were. To avoid player burnout, longer dungeons are sandwiched in between short ones and aren't all just labyrinths of hallways. Some are a series of connected rooms, others are one big area. Some are contained within a narrow vertical space, while others are flat and spacious. They function very similarly to the echelons they belong to, housing different kinds of monsters in various areas and hiding treasure behind optional rooms. Once again, a lot of work went into maintaining the novelty of each dungeon to avoid it getting stale or boring. Keeping players focused on scouting new monsters and finding treasure is the Monster series' central goal. In the original and its sequel, this was done with procedural elements. In Caravan Heart, player restrictions and random events would attempt to impede the ease of doing so. The Joker series had multiple ideas ranging from designing bite-sized condensed zones to having giant, impossible-to-fight monsters rampage across every area as an added stressor. A gimmick. Every Monsters title has a gimmick to keep players invested, and in The Dark Prince, it's all about seasons. Each season will come and go as you explore the world, and will change the geography of each echelon, revealing new areas to explore and making out-of-reach treasure accessible. The seasons and weather will also affect what monsters will spawn in any particular echelon. The seasonal changes of the Dark Prince further differentiate playthroughs. Some players might explore one echelon exclusively in the summer, or miss out on the spring variations of monsters in one echelon, resulting in a vastly different assortment of scouted monsters. Different players at the same point in the game can therefore have wildly different parties, and this is before counting the many factors going into monster synthesis. But if there's one element sorely missing from the Dark Prince that other Monsters titles had, it's gotta be Joker 3's writing mechanics. There's a surprising amount of platforming in the Dark Prince despite not having many platforming options, by which I mean you only have one. One tiny little hop, one cute silly leap, one skip in your agitated step. Lots of areas where jumping is necessary to reach treasure or access hidden parts of the map. Lots of verticality in each echelon where you have to painstakingly walk all the way back to the start of a platforming segment if you miss a jump. Many of these areas are only accessible during specific seasons, and it can get really frustrating having to wait for the season to change so you can scale a platform. Or worse, missing a jump or falling off a ledge and having the seasons change on you before you can correct your mistake. This is in stark contrast to Joker 3, which had a great deal of platforming sections, but gave you monsters to ride around on with abilities affecting the challenge. For an entry in the series to focus so much on exploring different zones, the removal of the ride mechanic feels like a huge misstep. I kept staring at slightly out of reach areas and wishing I had my trusty bullfinch to hop on over. It feels oddly limiting in a Monsters entry, probably because previous installments gave you abilities which could affect the world around you. Monsters 2, for example, had the world traversal stuff, learning how to cross water or break objects in your path. The season changes in the Dark Prince aren't the player acting on the world, they're the world acting on the player in a very passive way. One in which sometimes the only option you have is to sit and wait for it to happen to you. And this is the complete opposite of what you really want to be doing in the Dark Prince, scouring every corner of the map as much and as fast as you can. While we're on the what doesn't work train, actually scouting monsters in the Dark Prince is better and worse compared to previous entries in different ways. It maintains the hybridization of the series' monster catching options brought back in full force by the 3DS era. That is to say, monsters can be recruited through a show of force, and special items can be used to make recruitment more likely. But the Dark Prince brings back the older mechanic of enemy monsters being able to join your party on defeat if those items are used. This marks the moment when the more modern way of scouting monsters is finally completely merged with the classic method, fully embracing both ways to scout monsters. Treats you can feed wild monsters are now doubly important when it comes to scouting, as even failed scout attempts can still yield positive results if treats were used in the battle. This is just another way the Dark Prince makes clear it hasn't forgotten the improvements made by its predecessors and is just trying to trim away the fat from the existing monsters formula. But at the same time, without the Psych Cup mechanic, scouting is no longer as greatly affected by proper planning and strategy, and really comes further down to the random chance your monsters can generate for you. And maybe this is just me, but I found the scouting percentages to be a bit low, even after getting the bonus to scouting monsters you receive by defeating the boss in the specific echelon you're scouting in. With scouting left to random chance, I really felt like the Dark Prince had truly lost one of the better ways the series encouraged player agency and interaction. Scouting just isn't the same. It used to be something we could more directly affect, and this shift into letting the player indirectly manipulate monster scouting doesn't feel as good. You know what else doesn't feel good? The Dark Prince running on the Switch. Yeah, sorry if you've been worried about your video playback this whole time. Your computer's fine. The weird visual issues you're seeing are what the game plays like. Typically, I don't bring these issues up because they aren't bad enough to get in the way of gameplay, but this game suffers on the Nintendo Switch. During my time playing The Dark Prince, I had frequent slowdowns, stuttering issues, and even 2 or 3 game crashes. The saving grace is you do get accustomed to the mediocre performance, and thankfully, important sections like cutscenes and battles aren't greatly affected by it. These issues seem to be isolated to world exploration, which you're still doing a whole lot of, but I suppose it could be a lot worse. On one hand, these issues really feel like they could have been hammered out if the team working on it had been given more time. And on the other hand, I'm sure it would need less optimization if it were on a different console. For these reasons, I'm looking forward to the Dark Prince making its way to other consoles or PC. The performance issues are a blemish on an otherwise fantastic monster catching experience, and I'd like more people to give this game a shot. And you should definitely give this game a shot, even with the performance issues I'm mentioning here. But given the amount of marketing the Dark Prince got in the first place, I kind of doubt this is going to see a PC release. Maybe I'm wrong. Tell me in the comments if you think we're getting a PC release of the Dark Prince. And probably the worst of it is the Dark Prince having some pretty egregious on-disc DLC. Again, not usually something I bring up, but it's so extreme in this case that I have to. For $25 US, you can download a little file that activates a challenge dungeon mode, a second dungeon where you can recruit previously scouted and synthesized monsters, and a respawning treasure chest which cycles through a predetermined set of items. This is just unacceptable in a game which runs this poorly, that was marketed this poorly, that's expected to make its money off of the fans who've been asking for it for 7 years. It's borderline taking advantage of people, if not blatantly taking advantage of people. Putting cool features behind a paywall at launch is awful practice and completely anti-consumer, and I'd ask you not to encourage this sort of thing by buying it. I realize the irony in asking you not to purchase a thing I purchased, but I did it to make this video, so I could warn you about it. There's not much else to say here other than what you get is definitely not worth the price, and they're totally just taking you for a ride. Thankfully, you don't need the DLC at all to enjoy what the Dark Prince has to offer. I played through the entire thing without touching it. Still, knowing it's baked into the game with an additional price tag leaves a sour taste in my mouth. We don't often talk about the multiplayer aspects of a Monsters game, mostly because the community has moved on by the time we've gotten to it, the way the community is playing makes multiplayer impossible, or the service used to connect players together has been shut off or discontinued. But the Dark Prince is a rare occasion where we can actually talk about the multiplayer aspects. Quickfire contests are a fast, simulated string of matches that reward you with items based on how many wins you can get out of 30 battles. There's a shop that updates its inventory with exclusive items every day to compel you to check in with it once in a while for special deals. And yes, you can fight people directly online via ranked matchmaking or through your friends list. There's even a tournament mode you can participate in where you and 7 other players battle it out in brackets. Believe it or not, I think this is where the Dark Prince really shines. I've never had the chance to battle against someone else in Dragon Quest Monsters before, but it was a lot of fun. Not knowing what my opponents were going to do, trying to mastermind my way through their strategies, and going back into my party setup to address weaknesses I found in it during online play. The daily challenges and shop items provided in the Dark Prince keep the multiplayer functions fresh in your mind, assuring you'll be interacting with other players in some capacity every play session. And part of you will start to build your monster teams not to conquer the single player elements, but to gain more wins in the online arenas available. My only worry about the longevity of the Dark Prince is my same worry for every Monsters entry: long-term support. We finally have another Monsters title in the West, but it's on a console rumored to be succeeded soon. You can't play other Monsters multiplayer modes feasibly anymore. How long until the Dark Prince runs into the same problem? And will there be enough players around to support it? Does it even really matter? I'm of two minds about it. I really want there to be a community surrounding the Dark Prince, but at the same time, I'm satisfied with the base game. I'm happy I have it in my hands, but I worry what the future will hold for the series in the West, given the lack of marketing and subsequent sales. I suppose time will tell whether Monsters survives its reintroduction here. And that's the Dark Prince! It's a fun time marred by a couple of annoying external issues and a rock-solid addition to the Monsters franchise. It's a concentration of what makes Monsters so good and is a welcome return to the series. While die-hard fans might notice a few missing pieces at first, those concerns will quickly fade away as the tried and true Monsters experience shines through. Although it suffers from mediocre performance on the Switch, there's a strong polish applied to every other aspect of the Monsters formula, and sets a new standard in terms of level design and storytelling. If you've been waiting over 7 years for another Monsters title, this is it. This is what you've been waiting for. Minus a couple of hitches here and there.